Oh, I'm sure this has happened to you because it happens all the time. You ask your students to work together and they just don't. You set up the activity and you're excited to see how your students get on, and there's just silence. Oh, it can be really awkward, can't it?
Yeah, totally awkward, especially when you're expecting a big buzz of activity and it just falls flat. I'm Abby.
I'm Charlotte.
And you're listening to a My World of ELT podcast. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about our own experiences of trying to encourage our students to work together in pairs and groups.
So, Abby, how often would you say that this happens in your classes?
More often than you might expect, I guess, because I think we always assume, especially if you're teaching adults who have chosen to be there, that they're there to practice. They know that they're going to be asked to do some speaking activities, and therefore all you have to do is say the word and they'll get going on it. But it's always surprised me how much encouragement students often need, and that they don't just start talking without, feeling self-conscious or needing a bit of encouragement. So I think that was one of the things that I most questioned when I first started teaching. I thought it was me. I thought I was doing something wrong. Maybe my instructions weren't clear. Maybe they didn't understand. Maybe it wasn't a great activity and they weren't looking forward to doing it. When actually I was probably forgetting that we're dealing with humans and it's not just as straightforward as telling people to start talking to each other. I don't know. What about you?
Yeah, I know what you mean. And I've had that experience many a time. And I agree. Sometimes you think, right, well, I've planned this. It's a great activity, so they're going to love it. And you forget about things like, have they had enough time to warm up? Is this an interesting topic for them? Is it just before lunch when everyone's just thinking about that rather than completing your lovely activity that you've designed? So there's lots of reasons why this might happen. And Abby, do you think the teaching context makes a difference?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, having taught lots of different age groups, I'd always assumed that adults would be the ones that would just get on with it in a way. My main teaching context over the years has been mixed nationalities of adult learners. So although I have taught young learners and taught teachers and teenagers, thinking about that context, a lot of it came down to kind of culture and personality and maybe waiting for the other person to start, if somebody's not very confident. And I just fully assume that wouldn't be the case with adults, that they would get on with it. We're all here to do a job. So let's get on with it and let's get started. But I learned really, really quickly that that's not necessarily the case. However, younger learners who typically get a bad rap for things like classroom management, this is one of the things that I found they would just dive into. So they didn't really question it and they didn't care so much if they made a mistake or what their partner thought. They would just, get talking, get going. They'd be quite enthusiastic. Teenagers, you've got so many things at play there with teenagers. So whether they know the people that they're in a class with, they might be trying to save face, they might be in front of their friends and trying to play it cool, bit of peer pressure. So I think the context that you're teaching in the age group that you're teaching can have a massive impact.
So let me move on, Abby, and ask you, would you say that more often than not, this situation can be resolved?
I think it can be managed in the sense that if you just, there's no magic solution where suddenly from this day onwards, they will just start talking without any kind of intervention. So I think it can be managed, and it can be managed through very practical strategies on the teacher's part. And like you said earlier about maybe they haven't warmed up. Maybe it's just that you've thrown them straight into it. They've had no real time to think about it. So allowing them that time, giving them the chance to warm up can be enough. I think if you have learners who are just not that way inclined to start chatting away and taking the lead on an activity, that's possibly not going to change. But there are definitely things that we can do to manage it.
And Abby, what do you think happens if you just ignore this situation and hope that they will just kind of work it out?
It can be really tempting, can't it, to just turn around, busy yourself in the corner of your classroom, shuffle some papers around, and hope that they get on with it. But yeah, that's often not the case. In fact, sometimes it can feel worse if you just leave it and that silence gets longer and they're not really sure who should step in and go first or take the lead. So yeah, I think my advice would be don't ignore it. Sometimes they need a little bit of time, so don't jump straight in. But like I say, I think it's definitely our job to manage that situation and make it work for them and for us.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that silence, if you do ignore it, it can just get more and more awkward. And then they're less and less likely to work it out themselves. So again, yeah, as you said, I think it's our job to kind of think, right, I need to step in here and do something.
Definitely. So, Charlotte, what about the opposite situation where there's lots of talking? So, we mentioned earlier that students aren't working together, and it might be the case that there's lots of talking going on, but they're still not actually working together.
Yeah, and I think this can be a trickier one to spot when you're a teacher because you might be thinking, oh, there's talking, that's good, they're getting on with it, this is good, and everyone seems to be enjoying it and getting on. So that could be really reassuring as a teacher. But we need to kind of think, what are they talking about? Are they actually completing the activity? Because quite often they might be talking but maybe not on the topic or not actually completing the activity that we've set. They might be just chatting to their friends. They might be talking about what they're doing after class
Mm.
or in the lunch break. So we have to listen out for that one. And of course, there might be that kind of dominant student who's just doing all of the talking,
Yeah.
whilst other students are sort of sitting around not doing much at all. So I think all of these things, we have to kind of listen out for. And we'll do this, when we're monitoring, we'll be walking around, listening in, helping out, checking our students are on topic. And if we find out that they're not, then that's when we need to step in. And it might be worth mentioning actually at this point that we also have a module on dealing with dominant students in the classroom, as well as a module on encouraging students to work together.
That's right. Yeah. So that's a whole other issue, isn't it, really? Those
Mm.
dominant students, but can play a big part in collaborative tasks as well and have an impact on that. So, in your opinion, Charlotte, which students tend to take over the activities then?
I think, it depends on your class. And like yourself, my teaching background is with multilingual classes with students from all over the world. So I found that some of it can be very cultural. So we might have some students from cultures where they just won't speak out until they're invited or until they're asked, because culturally that's what they're used to. So we might just think these students are very shy or they haven't got a lot to say, which isn't the case at all, because they've got plenty to say, but they're just waiting for that invitation to talk. And then we've got students from other cultures who are very open and they will just start talking because that's how they've learned in their culture to engage in a classroom, and they know it's okay to just start talking. So I think maybe students from those kind of cultures might end up taking over, maybe not even realizing it, because they feel like they're filling a gap. They're filling the silence because other students aren't talking. So I think some of it is cultural, some of it is to do with personality. So there are some students who will be more confident generally, and not even necessarily with the language point that you're teaching that day, but perhaps just a confident person. They like talking, they're very chatty, they're very communicative. So, and there are shy people who are less likely to speak out in those activities. But I think it also comes down to the topic. So, on certain days, you will have students who are really interested in that topic. It's something in their L1 that they'd like to talk about, that they enjoy talking about, they feel confident talking about, or they really want to learn to talk about that in their L2 in English. And again, there might be others who think, this week I'm not really into this topic that, is on the timetable, on the syllabus. So I don't really have that motivation to talk about it in a group, so I'll just let the others get on with it.
It's a shame, isn't it, when you have those enthusiastic learners who've got a lot to say about a topic, you don't really want to rein them in because it's great that they're feeling so, engaged in the topic.
Yeah,
But then I guess, if we're talking about this in the context of collaboration and students, participating equally and getting involved, then it does need to be, like I said, I keep coming back to that word managed, but managed so that it's not just them doing all the talking, but that it is a two-way conversation or a two-way effort at least.
absolutely.
So, do you think that there should be a focus on soft skills and turn taking in the ELT classroom?
I think it's a really great idea if you can find the time and work that into your classroom culture. And we've talked in other podcasts that we've done about creating a safe space and a safe learning environment. And I think this can all be part of that. So it's all about setting your expectations as a teacher. So, what do you want to see from your students? And making it kind of clear that you don't want to see one person doing all of the work. You do want to see those softer skills like teamwork, listening skills, collaboration, and problem solving. And I don't know about you, but I actually think it's a great idea sometimes to just have activities where there isn't necessarily so much of a language focus, but you are focusing on those soft skills. And one of those activities that I've done in the past, which has worked quite well for soft skills, is the balloon debate. I
Oh,
don't know
yeah.
if you've heard of that one.
Yeah.
So, where everybody in the group has got a roll card, they're in a hot air balloon, and somebody has to be chucked out of the hot air balloon because it's too heavy.
Mm.
And everyone within the group has to have a debate. So they all have to talk about their role, they all have to talk about their strengths and weaknesses, what they can give to the group. And it's all about those soft skills, so teamwork, listening, problem solving, and collaboration. So activities like that can be great for developing those skills, and of course they can have a language focus, but they don't always have to, I don't think.
Yeah, no, that's a great activity. And I think it can be a good icebreaker as well, where,
Yes.
if they're talking about themselves and their strengths and weaknesses, it's almost like an icebreaker in disguise, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
it forcing them through the format of the activity to collaborate and take part and debate and turn take, which hopefully will kind of rub off on the other activities they do. But I think as well, that it can be the case that we include something that where there's a crossover between language skills and soft skills. So by introducing our learners to functional phrases like, anyway, what do you think? Or
Mm.
do you agree with that? Or stop me if if I'm talking too fast or too much. So by actually giving them language and phrases to interact with each other, that can be a good way of actually embedding those skills through a language-based task.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's always fun to have that one lesson where you teach your students how to interrupt each other politely.
Oh, yes.
It's always fun.
Yes, politely being the key word there, I think.
Yes. So, Abby, do you have any tips for how we can set up our activities to make sure students work together?
Yeah, I think when we consider freer speaking tasks where maybe we've put our students in pairs or groups and we've given them a time limit to discuss a topic, our assumption or our dream scenario is that they apply all of these turn taking skills and they use the time equally and they both contribute. But in reality, that's probably not going to be the case. So I think if we work into our activity a kind of a structure for the student, so maybe, one of you is student A, one of you is student B. A's, you're going to go first and talk for a minute. And then when I let you know that minute's up, B is going to go next and talk for 1 minute. And then you decide who's going to lead this part. So I think it can be, like I say, integrated into the design of the activity. So there's no question about who's starting, who goes next, what's the format of this task. we're being very explicit in that. I don't think we can assume anything. I think the more that we can set up. Now, the content is still fairly free, so they can still talk about what they want to within that allocated time. But it's just, yeah, building in a framework that means you're all going to do something here, and it's going to be managed so that you're collaborating as equally as possible.
That's a great idea.
And what tips do you give your trainees, Charlotte, when they encounter this in their classrooms?
Well, there's a few things that we suggest on our courses. And one of them we've mentioned before is the monitoring. So you make sure that you are listening in, and you make sure that, from a distance at first, you can stand back, tune in to each pair or each group as they're working, as they're completing the activity. And then you can tune into the pairs or the groups that are struggling. And that's where you think, right, do I need to step in here? How am I going to step in here? And you can sensitively intervene with a couple of questions to get them going, or perhaps some activities to get them to know each other first, and some low stakes tasks. So things that, we've mentioned before, maybe things that are developing soft skills, things that will help them relax and feel more comfortable talking to their partner or talking to their group.
I think those are really, really great suggestions. And the other thing that I've noticed when observing trainees in lessons, which sometimes they're not aware of themselves, is that students can sit through sometimes hours of lessons and not be asked to talk to the person next to them, or maybe not that particular person that they're sat next to on that day. And so they're going in cold. And from the trainee teacher's perspective, they might think, well, these students have been coming to these lessons for a while now. Why do they feel so awkward talking to each other? But from an outsider's perspective, you can see, this is the first time they're engaging directly with each other, not in open class discussion. And I have been aware sometimes of seeing students go, what's your name? Sorry, where are you from? And it's almost like they have to get those niceties out of the way before they can get stuck into the activity. So I guess a further thing is just don't underestimate what it is you're asking students to do when you're getting them to engage with someone they've potentially never spoken to before.
So true. If you would like to read some of our top tips on how to encourage those reluctant students to work together, click on the link for our free downloadable pointers.
And if you're not familiar with My World of ELT, you might not know that we also look at ways to deal with these classroom management situations from a language perspective. So if that's something you might be interested in, go to our website to check out our bite-sized language modules, where you can learn some practical classroom phrases and teaching tips on a range of topics.
Thanks for listening to this My World of ELT podcast, and see you next time.
Bye.